the spirit of Chag HaMatzos is Sippur Yitzias Mitzrayim. And that is the basic story. And in Shuvas Rosh and Klal Chav Daled, he wants to tie in all the mitzvahs are be'etzem Sippur Yitzias Mitzrayim. And the Minchas Chinuch and many others discuss the fundamental question. I think it's Mrs. Asay Kuf Nun Zayin in the Rambam, in Sefer HaMitzvahs. And what is the difference between Zechira Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is upon us every morning and every evening, and the mitzvah of Sippur Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is only once a year. And the Minchas Chinuch, I think, primarily wants to say Sippur Yitzias Mitzrayim is to others, but Zechira Yitzias Mitzrayim, like all the other mitzvahs Shebediva, is for yourself, which is not really accurate because the Mishnah says, Emein ben shoyel es atzmoi. And actually the Rambam brings the fundamental source of the mitzvah of Sippur Yitzias is not v'hegadu levincho, but v'zocharto. So we have two psukim that are almost the same in Parshas Boi. V'zocharto es hayoyim azeh asher yitzoso mimitzrayim. And then in Parshas Ha'ei there's a mitzvah Leman tiskor es yoyim tzeischo me'eretz Mitzrayim. Leman tiskor es yoyim tzeischo me'eretz Mitzrayim, as you all remember, is not the mitzvah of Sippur b'leil Seder. It is the mitzvah of Zechira. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, Hareni ki ben shivim shona. V'lo zochisi ad shebo ben zoyma. And ben zoyma says, Lo zochisi shetir mitzis Mitzrayim. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, ad shedosho ben zoyma. Leman tiskor es yoyim tzeischo. Yoyim. Elo hayomim. Yemei chayecho. Elo yomim. Kol yemei chayecho. Elo halaylos. So the posuk in Parshas Ha'ei, Leman tiskor es yoyim tzeischo mitzrayim, that is all year round. Zochar es hayoyim hazeh asher yitzoso mitzrayim, that is b'leil Seder. So both mitzvahs are Beloshen Zechira. So the fundamental difference is not for yourself or for others. Eimig Brocha. So Eimig Brocha is an amazing sefer. You're probably familiar. Rabbi Pomeranchik was a Talmud of the Brisker Rav. And when we say a Talmud of the Brisker Rav wasn't the Teufus Yeshiva. But like the Chazon Ish, there weren't really Rosh Yeshivas, but there were B'nai Torah and probably the cream of the crop of B'nai Torah and B'nai Brak that were Mishamish the Chazon Ish and Yerushalayim that were primarily Mishamish the Brisker Rav. Rabbi Pomeranchik wrote 3 amazing svarim. What people don't know, he passed away when he was 30 years old. He was mamish a younger man when he passed away, and he achieved a lot. And many Yesodis of the Brisker Rav that we know only from Rabbi Pomeranchik. And he writes, I heard from my Rebbe, from the Brisker Rav, quoting his great father Reb Chaim, that there are 3 fundamental differences between Zechira Yitzias Mitzrayim all year round and Sippur Yitzias Mitzrayim b'leil HaSeder. And the Brisker Rav told him that Reb Chaim used to go over this every year in his Seder. So I disagree with what he quotes, and I will explain why and how do I have the chutzpah to disagree. Because it's not in Chiddushei HaGrach al Rambam and not in Chiddushei HaGriz al Rambam. So the most reliable sources of the Torah, the Beis Bris, are Reb Chaim Sefer and the Brisker Rav Sefer. There are many svarim quoting these great Gedolim. They're probably more often quoted than any other Gadol in recent memory. So one of the 3 fundamentals that set apart Sippur Yitzias Mitzrayim from Zechira Yitzias Mitzrayim, according what the Eimig Brocha quotes the Brisker Rav in the name of his father. Number 1 is Matchel Begnus Umesayim Mishevach, and that is b'leil HaSeder. Number 2 is Kol Shelo B'Shlosheh Dvorim Elo Lo Yotzo Yedei Chavos, and you need to relate to Pesach Matzah Moror She'onu Oichlon Al Shemo. And Rabbi Shul, could you take a Minchas Osher, the 3rd door? on Pesach. I just want to see where I wrote about this quite extensively in Minchas Moyadim. So this sefer was reprinted now. For many, many years it was not available. And I just don't want to misquote. Yeah, and B'leil Seder, it means to be b'derech shaila v'tshuva. So he doesn't write like the Minchas Chinuch, that B'leil Seder, it needs to be relating the story to someone else, but it needs to be b'derech shaila v'tshuva. And these are the three fundamentals according to Reb Chaim. Ulani is nati, all these three are midrabanan and not min haTorah. So, because I wasn't there, and we have this shtickle Torah, Mekli Shlishi, and in Hilchos Seder, Ed Mepiyed is not really acceptable, and this is Kli Shlishi, Briskerov quoting his father, Rabbi Pomerach quoting the Briskerov. So, what I argue is that Reb Chaim did not intend to explain Mitzad Dinei D'Oraisa, what is the difference between the two mitzvahs, but rather to explain to his family before they started the Seder, what are the most important points of a Leila Seder? What is Ma'akiv in the mitzvah of Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim? Maybe Midrabanan, but what are the three fundamentals of the Leila Seder which you must do? Because if you skip the paragraph about how many Makkahs were there, you don't need to do the Haggadah again. But what are the three fundamentals that are Ma'akav B'Leila Seder? And if that was the question, I think Reb Chaim's response was quite correct. It must be Derech Shala V'Tshuva, and it definitely must be Matchel Beginis U'Masayim V'Shvach, and Rebbe Gamliel says in the Mishnah, Kol Shalom Yishloish Dvorim Eila Lo Yosech Avosan. But I do not think that these three are min haTorah, so they do not answer the question, Ma nishtano Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim mizechira Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the Rambam, in the very first halacha, in Perek Zayin Mehilchos Chometz and Matzah, so whom can I be matzriach to go over to the bookcase? You know, Rabbi Shua, you're the Rosh Hashanah, but you're just the closest. First door, corner, third floor. Yeah. So, Sefer HaMitzvahs, second floor, Zemanim. Rambam Zemanim Aleph. Zemanim Aleph.
What Aleph?
Zemanim Aleph. No, it might be, but no, I think it's base. Yeah, I think it's base. Chometz HaMatzah, it's base. So the Rambam, and the Rambam in Mishnah Torah brings all the details and all the halachas, but the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs usually focuses on the points, what is min haTorah. So, Kuf Nun Zayin, Shetzivon Elasapa B'Yetzias Mitzrayim B'leil Chameshosa B'Nisim B'Tchilas Halayla K'Vitzachas L'Shonoi Kol Ma Sheyosef B'Mama V'Yarech HaDvorim B'Gdolos Ma She'osa Lanu Hashem Ma She'osa Monem HaMitzvim Ma Avel HaMachomes V'Ech Lokech Hashem Nikmuseinu Harei Zeh Meshubach. And the Rambam also includes the mitzvah of Lahoilos Leforav. The Rambam, Perek Zayin Mehilchos Chometz HaMatzah, writes, what is the mitzvah of Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim? Mitzvah Seshel Torah, L'sapa b'nisim v'nefloy shenasu l'avosenu b'Mitzrayim, b'leil chameshosa b'nisim, shenemar zocher es hayoim hazeh asher yitzos b'Mitzrayim. K'mo shenemar, zocher es yoim haShabbos. And the Rambam gives us this line, both in Mishnah Torah and in Sefer HaMitzvahs. What is the comparison? And why doesn't it write there are Zechiras. And in both sources the Rambam writes, Sippur is Kemoisha Ne'emar Zochar Es Yom HaShabbos. Umenayin Shobelel Chamishosor Talmud Lo Mevi Higato Leveinchom. And then he goes on, Mitzvah Lo Hodiya Lebonim Afilim Lo Yishalo V'tzorach Lasos Shinui. And you need to do strange things that the kids should ask Manishtano. So it is obvious that from Mitzvah Halacha Beis and on, those are dinim, not necessarily min haTorah. What is min haTorah? Lesaper b'nisim v'nefloim shenasu laviseinu b'mitzrayim b'leil chamishosar b'nisan. And min haTorah, you don't need matchil b'gnisu Mitzrayim b'shvach. It does not necessarily need to be derech shala v'tshuva. And the Rana already writes in Psochim Kuf Tezvav that Rabbi Gamliel is only mitzvah min hamufcha. Lo yotzi dechavos. It doesn't mean you weren't yotzi dechoyvem min haTorah. And that is why I think the 3 points of Reb Chaim do not answer the question. Ma bein zeh lezeh. Min haTorah. What is the difference between Sippur and Zechira? So I do agree with Reb Chaim, 3 chilukim, but not the same 3 as the Abaye Pomeranchik quotes. The first one is detail, and that is the difference between telling a story and reciting or mentioning. If we translate Zechira, it is you need to mention. Actually, the real translation will be remembering, but Chazal teach us it needs to be bepeh and not belev. After all, the other pasuk says v'higadet. So how would we translate Zechira bepeh? Mentioning. Sippur is telling a story. So sometimes I like to use mishalim. So mommy puts the kids to sleep every night, Moshe and Miri, by telling them a story. And it happens to me, mommy is very busy in the kitchen. She asks Abba, tell the kids a story, otherwise they won't fall asleep. So the father gets into the kid's bedroom, sitting between Moshe and Miri, and he says, 20 years ago, we moved from America to Eretz Yisrael. And the kids say, Tati, that's not a story. He said, oh, no? So what does mommy do? Before we came to Eretz Yisrael, we lived in America. That's not a story. Could you please ask mommy to come in? He gets into the kitchen and he says, it's not working. I don't know what to do. I don't know what it is, what you do. Mommy comes into the room. She sits between Moshe and Miri and she says, 20 years ago we lived in America, and one day Abba came home after Shachris in the morning. He was so happy and he said, I won the lottery. We could afford it and we're going to move to Eretz Yisrael. And I was so happy, and I told you. And then we brought the movers, and they brought huge crates into our house, and it took us 4 weeks to pack up. And then we went to the airport, and we got on the plane, and you were so nasty on the plane. We had a long flight, and we arrived in Eretz Yisrael. We came to Yerushalayim, and Abba brought you all together, and we said a big Shechianu, and by the time it's over, the kids are fast asleep. And that's the difference between a story and mentioning a fact. Story demands details, and the Rambam teaches us which details. Mitzvah sasei shel Torah lesaper b'nisim v'neflois shenaso laviseinu b'mitzrayim. You need to stress, talk about miracles. Don't talk only about the Geula. And the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs also makes it very clear what is the mitzvah of Sippur. שציוונו לספר ביציאת מצרים בליל 15 בניסן בתחילת הלילה כפיצחוס לשון המספר. כל מה שיוסף במאמר ויערך הדבורים בהגדולת מה שעושה לנו השם ומה שעשו עמנו המצרים ואיך לקח השם נקמוסנו. What happened? What did Hashem do? You need to stress miracles. So a kid comes home from Sunday school, not day school. He goes to a conservative Sunday school, and Beleda said that his father asked him, Mike, no longer Moshe. Mike, what did they teach you in school about Yetzias Mitzrayim? And little Mikey says, thousands of years ago, we were slaves in a distant land called Egypt. And after hundreds of years of slavery, a young Jewish leader rose up from amongst the ranks, and he was extremely charismatic. And he united the people, and he gave them hope and courage, and he organized a rebellion. And they ran out of Mitzrayim. And while they were crossing the bridge over the Jordan, they crossed, and Paro was on top of the bridge. They blew up the bridge, and he fell into the Jordan, and he drowned, and most of the facts Mikey is telling are true. Yeah, we were slaves. Doubtless, goes without saying, Moshe was a charismatic leader, and he gave hope to the people. But that's all Dvar B'Telem. And they weren't yotzei in the midst of Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim, because the Rambam writes, V'sapra, Nisim v'neflois. It's all about Nisim v'neflois. The story is all about, like the Ramban writes at the end of Parshas Boy, Men hanisim hagedolim v'amifrosomim odomoide benisim hanestorim sheheim yisod kol ha'torah kula. This mitzvah is all about believing in miracles. And if you believe in the obvious supernatural miracles, you will believe in the concealed miracles, and the nisim hanestorim. So number one is detail. That's the difference between Sippur and Zechira. And the Rambam also says which details are ma'akev. You don't need Torah to go through the entire list, but nisim v'neflois she'osu HaKadosh Baruch. Number two, B'leila Seder, you need to stress this is the day, which we don't do all year round. All year round we are masked Yetzias Mitzrayim. B'leila Seder, this is the day. It all happened today. And that's the kavanah of the Rambam, K'moshe Ne'emar Zochar Esrei Meshabbos V'Kadsher. Of all the Sechiras, there are only two in which we stress this is the day. U'biyoyim Hashvi'i Shavas Vayenofesh. We don't know when Melchemes HaMolech happened. There is no date. But it is only these two Sechiras in which the mitzvah is, this is the day. Shabbos, this is the day HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Shevis Mamasa Bereshis. This is the seventh day of creation. And Belel Chamish Osar, the Rambam means this is the day in which it all happened. So when you go through the Haggadah, do we stress that day? I don't remember. But obviously we do. And that is the most important part of the Haggadah. When the children ask, Ma nishtano halayla hazeh mekol halayla. Bizman sheyesh matzah v'mora menocham lefonecha. Okay. But I think it's even before that. Ma nishtano halayla hazeh mekol halayla. And then we say, Avodah Me'inu. Because Baruch Hu tziyenu l'cheres. But if we don't mean to say it happened today, then the children will ask again, Abba, but why tonight? So it's obvious that the children want to ask, what happened tonight? Why is tonight the night? And we say, because tonight it happened. Avodem hoyinu. And that is number two. And that is Manatoir. And the Rambam writes, Mitzvah Seshel Torah L'Saper B'Nisan V'Nefo Shenasa L'Avseil B'Mitzrayim B'Leil Chamishoso B'Nisan. It doesn't mean that the mitzvah is Noeg B'Leil Chamishoso B'Nisan, but the mitzvah is to tell about the Nisan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made. Number three, Redati, is you need to vocalize. And even though you can make the mitzvah when you're alone in your room, but that is the nature of Sippur. Your thoughts can never be defined as telling a story. So preferably you need to tell the story to your children. If you have no children, tell the story to someone else. If no one is in the room, tell the story to yourself. But telling a story necessitates vocalizing. Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, like all the other mitzvahs shebedibur, we paskin brochas tezvav machlokes of Yossi v'chacham, and we paskin sorach sheyoytze v'svosav ve'ein sorach lahashmiya la'aznor. Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim sorach lahashmiya la'aznor, because otherwise it cannot be defined as Sippur. So a person could tell a story to himself. He's telling a story. And if there's no one else around, what can he do? But he needs to tell a story. And telling a story means you need to vocalize. And therefore, I think that Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim stands apart. Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim kula al b'moedim, sorach lahashmiya la'aznav. And there is one precedent. The Beis Yosef says, Mikro Megillah tzorach lahashmiya la'aznav, because it's persumei nisa. And your thoughts could never be defined as persumei nisa. So a person is Yosef Megillah alone. It is only a lachatchila dikedin b'rov am hadras melech. But still the Beis Yosef says, why is a cheresh exempt? Because tzorach lahashmiya la'aznav. Otherwise it cannot be defined as persumei nisa. And I say, kal v'chomer, Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim. If he's not vocalizing, if he's not mashmiya la'aznav, you cannot define that as Sippur. So the Pri Megadim writes that you could be Yoitza according to Ravina behirur halev. And the Pri Megadim says, no, tzorach lahoitzi b'svosov. And I say, you have a machlekes which is shaloi li b'deherchasa, because balavachi ein aloche ki Ravina as hirur kedibur. But this machlokes is mamish halacha l'maaseh. So Rav Shlomo Kluger argues, hirur alev cannot be Sippur, and I say, hamoitzi b'svosav also cannot be defined as Sippur, ad shema shmiya la'aznav. So chavan that you have an argument which is not a liba de'erchasa, you should go a step further and say, Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim tzorach la'shmiya la'aznav, because otherwise it cannot be defined as Sippur. So these are the three differences between Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim b'Leil Seder and Zechira Yetzias Mitzrayim all year round. Number one, detail. And which details? Nisim v'neflois, which is not required all year round. Number two is stressing this is the day. And that is the dimion between and Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim, unlike the other Zechiras, which we don't need to stress when did it happen, whether it's Masa Miriam, which is one of the Zechiras, or Melchemes Amalek, and we don't have the dates. But we just need to remember the events, and at the time, Masha Enkein Bashabas and Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And number two is not what to say, but how to say. And B'Leil Seder, tzorach lahashmiya la'aznav. And sometimes this is halacha l'maaseh, because many argue that women are mechuyev in Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim just like men. Af hen hoyu be'oisei hanes. So Tosfos and Megillah says, and Avsocham af hen hoyu says only by Mr. Rabban and not by Mrs. Dioraisa. But we also have the drosha Kol sheyeshnoi bebalter chacham etzishno b'kum achor matzah, and many achorim say kum achor matzah means all the mitzvahs of Leila Seder. It's not only matzah, it's more and Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And it is very often that, especially when there are guests around the table and the girls and the women, machmas tznius, just scan the Haggadah with their eyes or even their lips are moving, but that is not enough. To be yotzei the mitzvah, tzorach lahashmiya la'aznav. Which doesn't mean you need to shout out, but it needs to be audible, what you say, because if it's not audible, then not edible. If it's not audible, if you cannot hear what you're saying, it cannot be defined as Sippur kach nera la'aniyos. So these are the three fundamentals. So let me share with you a mashal. And this is a modern mashal, so don't look for it by the Dubna Magid. There was a Hasidic equivalent of the Dubna Magid, which probably you're not familiar with. The Dubna Magid was in the days of the Gra. I don't think he was a Talmud of the Gra, but he was a Chassid of the Gra. The Hasidic equivalent of the Divrei Magid was the Heinech me Alexander. And he also has some very beautiful Mishalim. He has nothing to do with the Shoshelis, the Hasidus Alexander. But he was in the time of the Kotzker Rebbe, he was in the Chabura of Rabbuna Mephishischa, Reb Heinech Alexander. But this is a Moshel, which is a modern one. So you buy a new phone, whether it's a normal phone or a smartphone, chas v'sholem, or any dumb phone, and one of the features of your new telephone is a speed dial. And it's a time saver, because you just punch one key and all 10 numbers come up on your screen. So you don't need to remember all those numbers, you don't need to punch in all those numbers, you just punch one key and all the numbers come up on your screen and you're connected. However, to enjoy that privilege, when you buy the phone, you need to have some patience and take some time and read the most boring book in the world, which is the user's manual, and just take your time and put all those numbers into the memory of the phone, because otherwise you cannot enjoy this feature, this possibility, and that will take time. And I say, Belela Seder, that is the time to put all those numbers into your memory. Takes time, you need patience, but it's kedai. It's a worthwhile endeavor, because from now on, all you need is to just punch one key, and all the numbers will come up, and you are connected. So Leila Seder is the time in which take a deep breath. This will take some time, have patience, but it's kedai. And if you did it properly, B'Leila Seder, all year round, you won't need to tell a long story. You won't need to go into many details. You just press one key, and it all should come up. And that is the difference between Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim B'Leila Seder and Zechira Yetzias Mitzrayim all year round, in which you just need to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it all should flow up to the top. And all the importance and what we need to learn from Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is believing in Hashgacha Shamayim, believing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares for us, and believing that at the end of the day, things will work out. Ki lo alman Yisrael. And Hashem Tzuri v'goyali. And might take some time. It took time in Eretz Mitzrayim, but things will work out, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't forsake us. And that is the message of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the three Seder's of Reb Chaim are important, and they stress what is most important about the Seder. And I wrote a tshuva, I do not remember whether it was printed or not as of now, and I was asked by soldiers in active duty, B'Leila Seder, and in the Metzias we live in, somebody out there, even B'Leila Seder, needs to be in the field, in the bushes, in the ambushes. And the same question is relevant to nurses in hospitals, B'Leila Seder, or doctors that need to be at a hospital, and sometimes for emergency surgery. What is most important in Leila Seder if a person says, I have 15 minutes? What are the priorities? First Kazayas, vice versa, Avikoimen. If I can't drink Dalet Koises, which ones are more important? And what part of the Haggadah is more important? So the Mishnah Berurah says, quoting the Dogon Mavoro, Kol Shalayoma, that's the most important. I disagree. I think Manishtana, Avoda Meinu, because that is more important. Because the Ran says Kol Shalayoma is only a mitzvah min ha-muvchar. Matchel begnus u'mesayim b'shvach, shala v'tshuva, that is the heart. That is the most important part. Manishtana, Avoda Meinu, v'yetziel HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'cheres. If you have time, then you go over to Kol Shalayoma. So Kol Shel Hayomar is a chiddush. It is not enough to tell the story. You also need to explain how the three mitzvahs, achila, how they fit into the Seder. Pesach zeh shoni ochlen, matzah zeh shoni ochlen, mor zeh shoni ochlen. How do they fit into Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim? Because it is clear that the mitzvahs shebachila and the mitzvahs Sippur are two sides of the same coin. They come from the same place, and they want to take us to the same place. And that is Rabbi Gamliel. So besides telling the story, part of mitzvah Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim is also explaining, so how do the mitzvahs fit in to the story? How do they fit into the narrative of Leil HaSeder? And that's Rabbi Gamliel. But that's a chiddush. That is beyond the fundamentals of Sippur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which are telling a story, Nisim v'neflois, midarabonon, matchel b'Nisim Mitzrayim b'shvach. But that is included in Nisim v'neflois. The Nisim v'neflois are what was, and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out. So I think the most important part is the beginning of that Haggadah, Manishtano, and our response to Manishtano. And the second most important part is Kol Shel Hayomar La Yotza Yedei Chai Bosei.